Welcome to the deep dive. We're diving into a topic you all specifically requested, toughness, but we're not just talking about, the typical sports stuff.
Right.
We're going to really dig into what toughness means and how it applies to every part of your life, not just, on the field or the court.
Yeah, it's going to be a fascinating exploration,
Yeah.
especially because we're going to be focusing on Jay Bilas' book, Toughness.
Mm-hmm.
And he's really coming at this from a really interesting perspective. I mean, he's not just a basketball analyst, right?
Right.
He's also a lawyer and a former player. So,
It's true. He's got all these different angles that he's bringing to the table.
yeah, and it's not just like he played a little college ball. I mean, he played at Duke, for Coach K.
Exactly. So it's a very well-rounded view of toughness. And one of the things that really stood out to me right away was this story he tells about his son's youth basketball team. They were playing against this team that wasn't necessarily more skilled, but they were definitely tougher.
Mm-hmm.
And guess what? Toughness won the game.
Yeah, that story really kind of drives home a crucial point, doesn't it? Toughness isn't about being the biggest or the strongest.
Right.
It's more of an attitude, a mindset,
Yeah.
a way of thinking. I mean, Bilas even calls it a philosophy. It's that mental strength to keep going, to push through challenges, even when you know things get really tough.
Yeah. It's like having that extra gear that kicks in when everyone else is ready to quit.
Yeah.
And here's what I think is so fascinating about this whole concept. Bilas argues that toughness is not something you're just born with. It's a skill.
Right.
It's something you can develop,
Yeah.
just like learning to play an instrument or to code or anything else.
And he doesn't just throw this out there.
Yeah.
I mean, he brings in these big names to back him up, right?
Oh, yeah.
Talking about Coach K,
Right.
Tom Creaney from college basketball,
Yeah.
even NFL figures like Herm Edwards.
Right.
And they all seem to agree that while some people might, naturally be inclined towards being tough, anyone can cultivate that toughness if they approach it with the right mindset.
Yeah, and with the right training.
Right.
So it's not about being a tough guy,
Yeah.
like swaggering around. It's about training your mind to be resilient.
Hmm.
And Bilas even gets into the nitty-gritty of it. He talks about specific techniques like visualization, so like picturing yourself succeeding, and positive self-talk, which is basically being your own cheerleader. He talks about his Duke teammate, Mark Allery, who used to psych herself up before free throws
Yeah.
by focusing on making the shot and not, the fear of missing it.
That's such a great example because it really shows how that mental game can directly impact performance.
Exactly.
And that's not just about sports, is it?
Yeah.
Think about any high-pressure situation you faced. Maybe you had to give a big presentation at work or, a tough conversation you needed to have. These mental techniques, these can totally help you there too.
Totally. So if we want to get tougher, where do we even start?
Right.
Where do we begin this journey? Well, Bilas kind of gives us a roadmap.
Like
It's
that.
called step 1. Embrace challenges. Don't shy away from them. And he even shares the story about his dad, giving him what seems like a really simple task, right? Carrying construction materials up to a roof.
Yeah.
But Bilas admits he wasn't mentally prepared
Wow.
for how boring and tough the job was. And as a result, he didn't do as well as he could.
That's fascinating. Because that story, what it shows is that even seemingly small, insignificant tasks, they deserve our full attention.
Exactly.
And our effort.
Yeah.
And that's where mental toughness comes in.
Right. Because it's about pushing through that discomfort, focusing on doing the job right, no matter what that job is.
Absolutely.
And speaking of focusing on what's right in front of you, there's this idea of next play that pops up throughout the book.
Oh, yeah.
And this is something that Bilas learned from Coach K. It's all about letting go of past mistakes or even past successes and just moving on, focusing on what you can control right now in this present moment.
It makes you wonder, though, how often do we let those past failures or even those past wins mess with our heads? Right.
And, stop us from doing our best in the present.
It's true. And I think it's definitely a challenge, but it's one that we can overcome,
Right.
with practice, with shifting our mindset.
Right.
And, Bilas really emphasizes that comparing yourself to others can totally get in the way of developing true toughness.
Yeah.
And he tells this really interesting story about playing pro basketball in Italy
Okay.
against this guy named John Ebeling. And he wasn't like a flashy player or anything, but he was incredibly tough and determined. And Ebeling, he really pushed Bilas to his limits. And what's interesting is that Bilas later realized he could never be as naturally talented as some of the basketball greats,
Right.
But he could match Ebeling's work ethic,
Yeah.
that never give up attitude. And I think it's a good reminder that toughness is about making the most of what you bring to the table, not wishing you were someone else.
Absolutely. It's about owning your strengths,
Yeah.
working on your weaknesses. Right. And sometimes that means facing some hard truths about yourself. Bilas tells this story about almost losing a loose ball during practice at Duke, and Coach K pulled him aside and was basically like, if you really wanted that ball, you would have dived for it. He was calling out Bilas's lack of commitment, that I want it bad enough mentality. That's so important to toughness.
Yeah, it's a reminder that toughness, it shows up in our actions, not just our words. Do we actually dive for that ball? Or are we just talking about how bad we want it?
Exactly. So we've been talking about individual toughness, but what about toughness when it comes to teams? Bilas has a whole chapter on communication and accountability, and it's about being a great teammate, not just, a talented individual.
Yeah.
And that means putting the team's needs ahead of your own ego. And Bilas learned this at Duke. He had to accept his role on the team, even when it meant not always being the star player. And speaking of accountability, remember that story about Bilas being on time for the team bus, but 2 star players, Johnny Dawkins and Mark Allery, were missing. And Coach K didn't just yell at them. He made the entire team run sprints as a consequence.
That's powerful. That's a powerful lesson in collective responsibility, isn't it? Everyone's actions have an impact. And it takes real toughness to own up to that, even if you weren't the one who messed up.
It does. But accountability isn't just about admitting when you're wrong. It's also about having the guts to say no to things that might derail the team's goals. Bilas talks about how Coach K stressed the importance of saying no to distractions, especially, during the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, it's so crucial to set those boundaries. Focus on what really matters.
Right.
And that can be hard,
It can.
especially when you want to people pleaser or avoid conflict. But sometimes that no is the toughest but most important thing you can do for the team.
And sometimes we need someone to call us out when we're not setting those boundaries. Bilas tells this kind of funny story about his wife calling him out for overcommitting to things outside of their family. He was so focused on being tough and helpful to everyone else that he was neglecting his most important team, his own family.
Yeah, that's such a great point. Toughness, it's not about being a workaholic or saying yes to everything. It's about being smart and strategic with your energy and your focus, directing those towards what truly matters, even if that means saying no to some things.
Right. It's about knowing your priorities. And sometimes it takes real toughness to stick to those when there's pressure to do otherwise. Now let's talk about pushing physical limits for a minute.
Okay.
Bilas describes this insane workout that he did before his junior year at Duke. He was so determined to get stronger, pushing himself to muscle failure in every set. He even got sick from pushing himself so hard.
Wow.
And what's interesting is that he wasn't sure he wanted to continue.
Yeah.
It was just too much, too painful, but he stuck with it, right?
He did.
Pushed past that discomfort and ultimately achieved his goal.
It reminds us that toughness isn't about being invincible
Right.
or immune to pain. It's about leaning into that challenge, knowing it's going to be hard, and having the mental strength to keep going when your body's screaming at you to stop.
Right. And it's also about recognizing when you need help. Bilas later realized he could have recovered from a knee injury more effectively if he had been more honest about the pain and sought treatment sooner.
That's so important. Toughness, it's not about suffering in silence. It's about knowing your limits and being smart about taking care of yourself. And sometimes adapting to a new reality. I mean, that could be the toughest thing you have to do.
Absolutely. One of the most powerful stories in the book is about Grant Hill and his amazing comeback after all those injuries, and that life-threatening infection. I mean, he had to completely change his approach to the game, to his life.
And he did it. He adapted to these new physical limitations. He actually used the phrase adapt and overcome, which is a motto used by the U.S. Army.
And he did it?
He did.
He emerged stronger on the other side of it. And it's this incredible example of mental toughness, in the face of truly difficult circumstances. Hill didn't just overcome physical challenges. He had to overcome the emotional and psychological impact of his injuries and that fear, right?
Yeah.
Of not being the same player that he once was.
It reminds us that we all have that potential.
Yes.
For resilience, for growth, for finding ways to thrive, even when we face these major setbacks.
And one thing that really struck me in the book was the emphasis on self-evaluation. No matter what the outcome of a game is, Bilas talks about how Coach K, Tom Izzo, all these incredibly successful coaches, they constantly emphasize honest self-assessment. Win or lose, Take a look at what happened, you know?
It's not just about finding your weaknesses either. It's
Yeah.
about recognizing your strengths
Right.
and being realistic about where you are and where you want to be.
Exactly. It's about constantly striving to improve.
Yeah.
And speaking of perspective, Bilas shares a really powerful story about Steve Kerr, the NBA champion and coach. And you might know that his father, Malcolm Kerr, was a prominent Middle East scholar who was tragically assassinated.
It's a story that really puts things into perspective, doesn't it?
Okay.
Toughness isn't just about winning games
Right.
or achieving personal success.
Yeah.
It's about how we face those really difficult life challenges with grace and resilience.
It's about understanding what really matters.
Yeah.
And finding the strength to keep going even when you face unimaginable loss.
And, there's another incredibly moving story in the book about Sabrina Lewandowski, who was a patient of Dr. Friedman. He specializes in treating brain tumors,
Right.
and she had undergone brain surgery,
Right.
and she was facing a really tough recovery.
Yeah.
But even with all of those challenges, she had this positive attitude and this determination to keep fighting.
And it's amazing how, you see these examples. It's like, how are they doing this?
I know.
And Dr. Friedman talks about the importance of hope in situations like that.
Yeah.
And he believes that hope can fuel toughness, giving people the strength to keep going even when things seem impossible.
I love that.
Yeah.
So powerful.
It's a reminder that even when things are really dark, hope can be that powerful source of strength
Yeah.
and resilience. But here's the thing. Bilas makes it clear that toughness, it's not just about gritting your teeth and powering through. It's also about finding joy in the journey, having fun while you're pursuing a goal.
Yeah, he actually says that having fun is doing hard things well.
Yeah, I love that.
Isn't that great?
That's so good.
It's such a great way to think about it.
Yeah.
It's that feeling you get when you push yourself and you achieve something really meaningful.
Absolutely. And it's not just limited to sports either. He talks about ESPN broadcaster Doris Burke, and he calls her one of the toughest people he knows in sports broadcasting. And it's not just because she knows the game inside and out. He admires her dedication, her willingness to take on any assignment, and her composure under pressure. And remember, she was criticized just for being a woman in a field that had been dominated by men.
Yeah.
But she didn't let that stop her.
Right.
She focused on her work, she prepared meticulously, and she let her knowledge and her passion speak for themselves.
It's so inspiring, isn't it?
It is.
How toughness can show up as resilience, grace, and this pursuit of excellence.
So I think what we're seeing here is that toughness, it's not just about, being physically strong or mentally unbreakable, but it's about having this multifaceted approach to challenges,
Yeah.
to setbacks,
Yeah.
even to the mundane parts of life.
Yeah.
And finding that sweet spot, right?
Right.
Where you're pushing yourself, but you're also finding joy in the process, recognizing the importance of teamwork, and never losing sight of what truly matters.
Beautifully said. And one of the most powerful ways to build that kind of multifaceted toughness is by stepping outside your comfort zone. Bilas even shares this story about auditioning for an action movie with Dolph Lundgren.
Whoa, wait a minute.
I know, right?
He's a lawyer, not an actor.
I know. But he wanted to challenge himself, push past those self-imposed limitations we all have. And you know what? He actually used the same techniques he'd learned from his high school drama teacher, Billy Creamer. Things like preparation and focusing on the process, not the outcome.
So he's treating this audition like a legal case, basically.
Exactly. And it worked. He actually landed the role of an alien cop.
No way.
Yeah, it just goes to show you that sometimes those greatest opportunities come from doing things that scare us a little. Venturing outside that comfortable, familiar space.
So true. And he talks about how all these experiences outside his comfort zone, acting, public speaking, even that construction work he did for his dad, it made him a tougher lawyer and a better broadcaster.
It makes sense when you think about it. I mean, he was learning to adapt, to handle pressure, to keep going, even when things felt awkward or uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And all of that builds resilience.
So it's not just about seeking out these big dramatic challenges. It's about recognizing those smaller opportunities in our everyday lives to push ourselves a little bit.
Absolutely. Even something like public speaking, which so many people dread, can be a training ground for toughness.
Oh, yeah.
Bilas talks about how those high-pressure forensics competitions he did in high school, they actually prepared him for the courtroom and for broadcasting.
Wow. So those nerve-wracking speeches in front of the class actually paid off.
It's amazing how seemingly random experiences can build on each other and contribute to our overall mental strength. It's like building a muscle. You work it out in different ways, and it becomes stronger and more adaptable. And, speaking of mental toughness, one of the most practical things Bilas talks about is this idea of next play.
Oh, yeah, that's that thing he learned from Coach K, right?
Right. It's all about moving on from both mistakes and successes and focusing on what you can control in the present moment. It's a really helpful way to manage those emotional ups and downs that we all experience both in sports and in life.
Because if you get caught up in dwelling on the past, you miss what's happening right now.
Exactly. It's like driving a car while staring in the rearview mirror. You're bound to crash.
So how does next play actually work? Like, can you give me an example?
Sure, think about Christian Leitner's game-winning shot against Kentucky in the 1992 Elite Eight. I mean, it's one of the most famous moments in college basketball history.
Oh, yeah.
But Bilas talks about how, even after that incredible high, the focus immediately shifted to the next game, the next challenge. Dwelling on past victories, no matter how awesome, can lead to complacency.
So even when you're on top, you gotta stay hungry.
Exactly. And on the flip side, next play also helped Bilas deal with his own mistakes on the court. He learned to view those errors as opportunities to learn and grow instead of letting them, wreck his confidence.
It's a really valuable skill because we all make mistakes, but it's how we bounce back that really defines us.
Absolutely. It's about reframing failure as a learning experience rather than a dead end. And next play gives you that framework to do just that. Now, another big theme in the book is teamwork, and specifically the importance of accepting your role on the team.
So it's not all about being the star player.
Right? Sometimes it's about recognizing that the team needs you to play a different role and being okay with that. Bilas talks about how even as a highly recruited player at Duke, he had to learn to embrace a role that wasn't always about being the leading scorer.
It's about being humble and putting the team's needs first.
Exactly. And he gives some great examples of how embracing your role, even if it's not the most glamorous one, can lead to success both for the team and for you as an individual. Remember Tiffany Roberts, the soccer player we talked about earlier?
Oh, yeah. She was always willing to do whatever the team needed, even if it meant sacrificing her own playing time.
And that kind of selflessness is what makes great teams truly great. It's about understanding that every role matters. Every contribution is valuable. And sometimes the toughest, most valuable players are the ones who are willing to put the team first, even if it means putting their own ego aside.
That's so important. But how do you actually create that kind of team culture where everyone is bought in and willing to sacrifice for the greater good?
Well, Bilas talks about how Coach K instilled a sense of collective responsibility in his Duke teams. Everyone was held accountable for each other's actions.
Wasn't there a story about a team bus?
Yes, Bilas was on time for the bus, but two of his star teammates, Johnny Dawkins and Mark Allery, were missing. And Coach K didn't just yell at them for being late. He made the entire team run sprints as a consequence.
Wow, that's tough love. But I guess it sends a message that you're all in this together.
Exactly. It creates a culture of accountability where everyone understands that their actions impact the group. It's about owning that responsibility, whether you're the one who messed up or not.
It sounds like communication is a big part of this, too.
Absolutely. Bilas talks about how important it is to be able to have honest conversations with your teammates, even when they're difficult. It's about offering support, but also challenging each other to be better.
So it's about creating a safe space where people can speak their minds and hold each other accountable without fear of judgment.
Right. And it's about understanding that sometimes the toughest thing you can do for the team is to speak up, to point out a problem, or to offer constructive criticism.
Bilas also talks about how this idea of collective responsibility goes beyond just holding each other accountable for mistakes. He gives an example from the U.S. women's national soccer team who he interviewed for the book.
Oh, yes. They talk about how they approached fitness training as a team effort. It wasn't just about individual players pushing themselves. It was about supporting and encouraging each other to reach new levels of fitness together.
That's really cool. It's like they understood that their individual fitness was directly linked to the success of the team as a whole.
Exactly. It's that we're all in this together mentality now, while a lot of toughness is about pushing through discomfort. Bilas also emphasizes the importance of knowing when to ask for help. He actually shares a pretty personal story about his own struggles with the knee injury during his junior year at Duke.
He tried to tough it out, didn't he?
He did. He thought that pushing through the pain was the tough thing to do, but it actually ended up costing him valuable playing time and impacting his performance. He realized later that he could have managed the injury more effectively if he had been more open about the pain and sought treatment earlier.
So sometimes the toughest thing is admitting that you need help.
Exactly. It's about understanding your limits and being proactive about seeking support when you need it. And sometimes the toughest thing is having to adapt to a new reality, like Grant Hill's story, for example.
His comeback after those multiple injuries and that scary infection is just incredible. He had to completely reinvent his game, adapt to a new physical reality.
It's a truly inspiring story of resilience and the power of mental toughness in the face of real adversity.
Mm.
Grant Hill didn't just overcome physical limitations. He had to overcome the emotional and psychological impact of those setbacks, the fear that he might never be the same player again.
And he came out stronger on the other side. It's a great example of how we all have the potential to adapt and overcome even the most difficult challenges.
Absolutely. Now, another important takeaway from the book is the emphasis on self-evaluation, regardless of the outcome. Bilas talks about how Coach K, Tom Izzo, and other great coaches constantly emphasize honest self-assessment as a critical element of growth and development.
So it's not just about celebrating the wins and forgetting the losses.
Right. It's about taking the time to really analyze your performance, both individually and as a team. What went well? What could have been better? What can we learn from this experience, win or lose?
So it's about being honest with yourself even when it's uncomfortable.
Exactly.
It's about striving for excellence, not just settling for good enough. And it's about recognizing that there's always room for improvement no matter how successful you are.
And a big part of that is keeping things in perspective. Bilas shares some really powerful stories in the book that remind us that toughness isn't just about winning games or achieving some external goal. It's about navigating life's challenges, the ups and downs, the joys and sorrows, with grace and resilience.
Like the story of Steve Kerr, whose father was tragically assassinated, it's a stark reminder that true toughness often emerges not in moments of triumph, but in those quiet moments of grief and resilience. It's about finding the strength to keep going, to keep pursuing your goals, to find meaning and joy, even when the world feels dark.
It's a powerful reminder that life can throw some really difficult curveballs, and it's how we respond to those challenges that really defines us. Absolutely. And there's another incredibly moving story about Sabrina Lewandowski, a patient of Dr. Friedman, who specializes in treating brain tumors. She had undergone brain surgery and was facing a really tough recovery. But despite all the challenges, she had this incredible positive attitude and this determination to keep fighting.
It's amazing how some people are able to maintain hope, even in the face of such difficult circumstances.
It is, and Dr. Friedman talks about the importance of hope in situations like that he believes hope can fuel toughness, giving people the strength to keep going, even when things seem impossible.
So hope is like a secret weapon.
You could say that it's this powerful internal resource that can help us find the strength and resilience to persevere even when the odds are stacked against us. And I think that's a perfect segue into one of the key takeaways from the book, which is that toughness isn't just about gritting your teeth and powering through.
It's not just about suffering in silence and pushing through the pain.
Right. Bilas argues that it's also about finding joy in the journey, embracing the challenges, and even having fun along the way.
Yeah, he actually says, having fun is doing hard things well. I love that quote.
It's such a great way to think about it. Toughness isn't about making things harder than they need to be. It's about finding that sweet spot where you're pushing yourself, but you're also engaged. You're finding meaning in the process, and you're allowing yourself to experience the joy that comes with doing hard things well.
Yeah, it's like that saying, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. But it's not just about surviving challenges, it's about using them to learn and grow.
Exactly, and that growth mindset is essential for developing true toughness. Now, before we wrap things up, I want to touch on one last story that really resonated with me. It's about Steve Kerr, the NBA champion and coach, and how he dealt with the tragic loss of his father who was assassinated.
That's such a heartbreaking story. It's hard to imagine facing something like that.
It is. And Bilas uses Kerr's story to illustrate a really important point. Toughness isn't just about winning games or achieving personal success. It's about navigating life's challenges, the truly difficult ones, with grace and resilience.
It's about finding the strength to keep going even when the world feels like it's falling apart.
Exactly. And it's about recognizing that even in the face of tragedy and loss, life goes on. We can choose to let those experiences break us, or we can choose to find meaning and purpose in them and use them to fuel our growth.
And speaking of finding meaning in difficult circumstances, there's another incredible story in the book about Sabrina Lewandowski, a patient of Dr. Friedman who specializes in treating brain tumors.
She had undergone brain surgery and was facing a really challenging recovery.
Yeah.
But even with all the obstacles, she maintained this incredibly positive attitude and this fierce determination to keep fighting.
It's amazing how some people are able to hold on to hope even when facing such a daunting diagnosis.
It really is.
Yeah.
And Dr. Friedman talks about the importance of hope in those situations. He believes hope can be a powerful fuel for toughness, giving people the strength to keep going, even when the odds seem insurmountable.
It's like hope gives them that extra boost of energy, that belief that things can get better.
Exactly. And it's a reminder that even in the darkest of times, we can choose to focus on the possibility of a brighter future.
So throughout this deep dive, we've talked about toughness as this multifaceted concept. It's about pushing through discomfort, facing challenges head on, but it's also about knowing when to ask for help, about adapting to new realities, and about maintaining hope even when things are tough.
And one thing that Bilas emphasizes throughout the book is that toughness isn't just about gritting your teeth and powering through. It's also about finding joy in the journey, embracing the challenges, and even having fun along the way.
He even has that great line, having fun is doing hard things well.
Right. And he uses ESPN broadcaster Doris Burke as a perfect example of this. Bilas considers her one of the toughest people he knows in sports broadcasting. And it's not just because she's incredibly knowledgeable about the game. It's also her work ethic, her dedication to her craft, her willingness to take on any assignment, and her ability to handle pressure with grace and professionalism.
And remember, she faced a lot of criticism and negativity simply for being a woman in a field that was dominated by men.
She did. But she didn't let that deter her. She stayed focused on her work, prepared meticulously, and let her knowledge and passion for the game speak for themselves.
And she eventually earned the respect of her peers and the viewers, proving that toughness and grace can go hand in hand.
Absolutely. Now, before we wrap things up, I want to circle back to one of the most practical takeaways from the book, the idea of next play.
Oh, yes. That's the concept Bilas learned from Coach K, right? The idea of letting go of the past, whether it's a mistake or a success, and focusing on what you can control in the present moment.
Exactly. It's such a powerful tool for managing our emotions and staying focused on what matters most. It prevents us from getting caught up in the past, whether we're dwelling on a mistake or basking in a past victory.
It's about being present and engaged in the moment.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's a skill that can be applied to any area of life, not just sports.
So whether you're an athlete, a business person, or just navigating the ups and downs of everyday life, this next play mentality can help you stay grounded and focused on what you can control. Now, another key takeaway that really stood out to me was the importance of accepting your role on a team.
Bilas talks about how, even as a highly recruited player at Duke, he had to learn to embrace a role that wasn't always about being the star player.
It's about recognizing that the team's success is more important than individual glory.
Exactly. And it's about understanding that every role is important, that every contribution matters.
And sometimes the toughest and most valuable players are the ones who are willing to put the team's needs ahead of their own ego.
Absolutely. Now, a big part of creating a successful team culture is accountability. Bilas talks about how Coach Key instilled a sense of collective responsibility in his Duke teams. He made it clear that everyone was accountable for each other's actions, that they were all in it together.
And there's that great story about the team bus where two of the star players were late and Coach K made the entire team run sprints as a consequence.
It's a powerful example of how you can create a culture of accountability. It sends the message that you're all responsible for upholding the team's standards and that you'll face the consequences together, whether you were the one who messed up or not.
It's about having each other's backs even when it's tough.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And Bilas also talks about the importance of communication in fostering accountability. It's about being able to have those honest conversations with your teammates, both to offer support and to challenge each other to be better.
So it's about creating a safe space where everyone feels comfortable speaking up and holding each other accountable.
Right. And it's about understanding that sometimes the toughest thing you can do for the team is to point out a problem or to offer constructive criticism. Now, another aspect of toughness that we've touched on throughout this deep dive is the importance of dealing with setbacks and adversity. And one of the most inspiring stories in the book is about Grant Hill's incredible comeback after those multiple injuries and that life-threatening infection.
It's amazing how he was able to completely reinvent his game, to adapt to a new physical reality, and to come back even stronger than before.
It's a true testament to the power of resilience and the human spirit's ability to overcome incredible challenges. And, one of the things that really helped Grant Hill through that difficult time was the support of his teammates and coaches.
That's so important. It's a reminder that we don't have to go through tough times alone.
Exactly. And Bilas talks about how his own experience with a knee injury taught him the importance of asking for help when you need it. He realized that trying to tough it out and play through the pain wasn't always the best approach.
Sometimes the toughest thing is admitting that you need help.
Exactly. And that's a lesson that applies to all of us, not just athletes. Whether we're dealing with a physical injury, an emotional setback, or any other challenge, it's important to remember that asking for help is a sign of strength, not weakness. Now, another key takeaway from the book is the importance of self-evaluation.
Bilas talks about how Coach K. Tom Izzo and other successful coaches constantly emphasize the importance of honest self-assessment, regardless of whether you win or lose.
Right. It's about taking the time to analyze your performance, both individually and as a team. What went well? What could have been better? What can we learn from this experience?
It's about being honest with yourself, even when it's uncomfortable.
Exactly. And it's about recognizing that there's always room for improvement no matter how successful you are.
So it's not about dwelling on mistakes or letting victories go to your head. It's about learning from every experience and using that knowledge to keep growing and evolving.
Exactly. And, all of these concepts, they tie back to this idea of toughness as a skill, something that we can cultivate and develop over time.
It's not something we're just born with. It's something we can work on and improve just like any other skill.
Absolutely. And I think that's a really empowering message because it means that no matter where we are on our journey, we all have the potential to become tougher, to face our challenges with greater resilience, and to achieve our goals.
So if you're feeling like you need to boost your own toughness, think about some of the things we've discussed today. Embrace challenges, practice, next play. Cultivate a positive mindset. Focus on what you can control. Ask for help when you need it, and never stop learning and growing.
And remember, toughness isn't just about physical strength or mental fortitude. It's also about compassion, empathy, and the willingness to support and uplift others.
It's about being a good teammate, a good friend, a good person. And it's about recognizing that true strength often lies in our ability to be vulnerable, to connect with others, and to build each other up.
We hope this deep dive has given you a new perspective on what it means to be tough. And we encourage you to keep exploring this concept, to keep pushing your own boundaries, and to keep striving to be the best version of yourself.
Until next time, keep diving deep.